Gjoen. I'm an artist, multimedia, multidisciplinary artist. I do a lot of limited edition prints, quite a bit of digital art as well. But yeah, that's kind of my introduction.
Do you doing the digital art the mostly?
It depends, a lot of it starts digitally, but it starts with a painting usually, and then it kind of goes over into the digital world. I do a lot of the designs as well are kind of done on computer before they're actually realized, either in painting or in porcelain or whatever medium I use. So.
But you studied the art in some like school or university, or it's your like hobby?
I studied fashion design. So I have a master and a bachelor in fashion design, and I worked in fashion for 12, 15 years before I kind of decided that didn't want to change, but I kind of decided I started doing art again. I studied fine art before I did my bachelor, but it wasn't a bachelor degree or anything like that. But I came back full circle about 12 or 13 years ago when I was I wanted some pictures for my own house. And I was looking around and I kind of said, actually, I can do this, can't I? And so that's how kind of I started. And then I got quite a good reception of what I'd done. And so I kind of contacted a couple of galleries, and they were quite supportive and quite inquisitive and wanted to kind of know more, and kind of it was quite I got quite good feedback from them. So I kind of went back to the drawing board, and then like 2 months or 3 months later, I kind of came up with kind of a collection of artworks based on what they said. Listen, we want this price range, we want this size, blah blah blah. So kind of I came back to them 3 months later after I kind of redeveloped what I'd already done and showed them, and it kind of took off from there. So I kind of quit my job in fashion about a year later, because I was making more money from the art at that point. And the problem was also I was traveling so much with work. I was probably away 3 weeks in a month abroad in Italy, and we did shows in everywhere else as well. So I had to choose between the two, and I didn't want to quit my job, but I kind of had to make a choice. And of course, the choice probably was the correct one, because if you can work for yourself and have your own hours and kind of be your own boss, it's kind of a bit better than working for someone. Although I did enjoy working, it's sometimes it's quite lonely being an artist, because a lot of the time you're alone. But so I do miss going into an office still to this day.
But you prefer to be like a self-employed, so it's
yeah. I mean the choice was correct back in the day when I did it, and I have my assistant here in London who kind of deals with things when I'm not here, and even not, I kind of FaceTime with her every day. So kind of, although I'm in my studio in Florence and I'm alone, I still have a face-to-face kind of conversation with someone, at least daily. So I'm not just stuck in my studio by myself, kind of going crazy. But yeah.
Yeah, I see. But yeah, like as well as in your arts, like you're using a lot of old, maybe some from the antique part of the drawings, or the paint, or the art from the past.
I mean, when I started this, the whole thing was to kind of take something from the past and kind of redoing it and kind of redeveloping it, modernizing it, making it contemporary for today's kind of market. first of all, people can't afford a Caravaggio on their wall. So you kind of have to kind of develop something that a younger clientele will also like, but also kind of have this aesthetic that is from the past, which I kind of have always liked and kind of I always kind of go back to. And after the years have gone by, I've also kind of developed that further. The first prints I ever did was porcelain, Delft blue and white porcelain. And with that, well, first of all, I'll explain why I did that. I think it was a grenade, a skull, and heart an Uzi. And my mother was a psychiatrist, and so kind of that was kind of my thinking behind that. Is porcelain is something very fragile, and you're putting it in a skull to kind of symbolize the fragility of the human mind. And that's kind of the first things I did. So I kind of took something from my past, my mother, and things like that, and kind of incorporated into something I kind of aesthetically liked. And then the same with the Uzi and the same with the grenade. It's something that kills in the wrong hands. But if you kind of do it in porcelain, it kind of symbolizes the fragility of, again, the human mind, because it's the man who actually has to throw the grenade or pull the trigger of the Uzi. It's not the, so you kind of just kind of presenting something in a different light, making people think twice about what you're seeing in front of you. Yes, it's a gun. Yes, it's a grenade. But it's ultimately the human mind, the person who actually does the evil by pulling the trigger or throwing the grenade. So yeah, but then that's kind of been the porcelain again has been embellished on through, I always come back to it. I've kind of gone into this kind of rabbit hole where kind of the more you find out about porcelain, the more you kind of get interested, the more it kind of it's very fascinating, because I've always liked porcelain, but I wasn't this fanatic that kind of I am more or less now, where I can see a Meissen figurine from miles away, and I can see a fake Sèvres from a real one, for example. So no, I mean, I've done quite a few interesting projects with porcelain, which has kind of made it kind of into one of my things, kind of cemented it to part of my art and style in a way. So you have that part basically, and then you have the other part, which is also kind of the paintings and the prints and things like that. And again, I kind of always try to learn things and kind of modernize things that have been done in the past. You take, I've done this when I do a print, for example. I've done this what's it called, an engraving, and you take the engraving and you have to modernize it. So you take different parts of the past, even if it's print. Currently, I'm working on something with the Japanese woodblock printing. So, you have to go completely into that. And how did they do it? What paper did they use? What's their inspiration and all that? And so for me, it's kind of a learning curve as well. You're constantly learning new things while you're actually trying to do a new print, presenting it in a contemporary way, but based on older principles.
So we could say like you lead with maybe some like past with for example with a Caravaggio, and that's you with this leading you became the accidental artist.
Yes, I mean, yeah, the basis is always kind of something from the past. And you, of course, have to make choices when you're doing a piece of artwork. Should I kind of, you have to make it you can't complicate it so much that it's impossible to do. And so you kind of have to make choices, although they're kind of based on paintings and things like that. You kind of have to learn as much as you can about not necessarily the painting, because you of course you can read about Caravaggio or Rembrandt, whoever, but I think the important thing there is to kind of modernize it to the point where kind of people don't look at it as an old painting anymore, but they look at it with lust, so they want it on their wall, and they kind of, because it kind of, you're re-representing it in a modern way. So you might not want Titian or Caravaggio on your wall because, I mean, I would, but, in a contemporary setting, you might not want that. So you kind of have to develop a sense of kind of understanding the fine line between you're using the Caravaggio in your piece, but you're also kind of modernizing it. So it doesn't become a cliche, and it doesn't kind of, how many people have you seen kind of paint, a Chanel logo on a painting, I've done the same, I put a Chanel logo on a grenade, so I'm not innocent in that. But it's kind of one of those things you kind of have to, there's an easy way out always, and there's a more intelligent way. And I think you can very easily see when people have taken the easy way out, and you can also appreciate when there is more to the story behind, there's more intelligence behind it. I'm not saying that I'm intelligent by any means, but I try not to kind of fall into these kind of the easy way kind of to do it. So yeah, I mean, in the beginning as well, I kind of bought a lot of paintings at auction, because then obviously you can scan them, you can use them, you can, there's no kind of rights connected to them, and you scan them in, so they kind of you can blow them up to poster size or billboard size, sorry, and it's quite interesting because a lot of paintings, Dutch masters, they were usually this big, 70-ish by 56 or something like that centimeters, around there. And so by scanning them in, you can make things that are 2 meters wide, so it's quite interesting that you also use scale in a different way than they would. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that kind of you can change and kind of redo to kind of modernize a piece or a painting.
In therapy, you should go into a childhood to solve problems in your past to renew yourself in your life right now. That's why you mix history and modern art, or not?
As therapy?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, it's too far. I think there might be something there, to be honest, but I don't necessarily think that's why I do it. Not for myself, anyways. But I think it's more to do with. I think it's got to do with culture, history, and I think a lot of people have lost a lot of their culture. And I'm not going to mention any specific nations, but, for example, Italy has, they're much, no, I'm not going to go there because I'm going to offend someone. But let's just say there's a lot of culture in Italy compared to, of course, Spain, Portugal, whatever, even Berlin or Germany rather, there's a lot of culture. And I think but I think there's an interest in culture in Italy. I'm not saying that there's not in other places, but I feel that there's more there than, for example, in the UK. And also the history is, it's kind of, I don't know, it's on your doorstep in Italy a bit more, you have things, from you have that everywhere, but yeah. So I think that's kind of why I I think that's more my kind of thing, by using things from the past to kind of explore, but also for myself, this culture, and kind of, because it interests me, and it also, I'm kind of presenting culture to a person that likes something and they don't know it's because it has a cultural reference necessarily. And they might not get that, what cultural reference that is, because that's another thing I want to talk about, is like, I don't necessarily think that the piece should portray something. I don't want to put my opinions onto the people who view the artwork. I think they should stand in front of the artwork and they should make up their own opinion. It should talk to them, even if I meant something different with it. You know, I think if it means something different to someone else, that's fine, and that's perfect, because they should connect with the artwork, not necessarily how I connect with it or why I did it. And I think that's quite brilliant when people do, because they've connected it without kind of me, because, you know, I'm not here to kind of tell people what to do. And that's also the thing with culture. The thing about culture is, like, you learn culture and you kind of choose kind of where and what to learn about. And I think that's kind of important. Like, you choose what you like, you choose where, you know, you choose which museums you go to, you know, choose which pictures or paintings or exhibitions you go to based on what you like or whatever. But yeah, sorry, I went on a tangent and I can't remember what I'm talking about anymore. Forgive me.
But no, that's amazing. But how do you find themes for your art pieces? Mostly you use Renaissance artwork and like renew them, or how does it work for you?
I very often, so I like a lot of contemporary art as well, and I like going to contemporary exhibitions because when you mix the two, so you go, for example, to a contemporary exhibition at a museum or whatever, and then you kind of, you have all this knowledge of the past. So all the Renaissance pictures, you know, they're all here basically. And when you see contemporary art, you suddenly, sometimes you understand, like, oh, that's interesting. That's how I should do with this, the piece I have kind of, I saw 2 years ago, or, you know, the painting I have over my whatever bed or something like that. So it's, I think the basis is kind of this, you know, the Flemish kind of masters, the Renaissance, and even Baroque, and even, you know, a bit later than that. It's always a basis, unless it's kind of porcelain, because porcelain, you know, then it's kind of, we're talking a bit earlier, not earlier, but later, as in when fine bone china was kind of invented in Europe mostly. But yeah, I kind of like to take things from different places. I don't only like to kind of base it on the Renaissance, for example, or a painting from the Renaissance. I think when I choose or take a painting, it's something that it has to speak to me. It's not just any painting. It's not just any style. And the funny thing is, I see a lot of artists which kind of do quite similar things to me sometimes. And I'm like, well, the problem with this is a copy of something, and it's done in, you know, the 1900s, early 1900s. And you can obviously see that it's done in the early 1900s. And the thing is, this artist doesn't actually know that. You know, and that's what kind of annoys me a bit, because people see, oh, it's a still life. Oh, wow, it's amazing. No, it's not, because there's, you know, millions of still lifes, but there's still lifes that are nicer than other still lifes. And yeah, I don't think, you know, you also need an eye to kind of weed out what's a nice painting and what's not. Especially with still lifes, because there's so many kind of you know, there's Italian school, Dutch school, continental school, whatever. Of course, I have my preferences. I tend to not like so much the Italian school, but I prefer the Dutch school because they kind of mastered it a bit better, I think. But anyways, so yeah. Again, I have not answered your question, possibly.
And yes, and if we will go in more about like a historical part and some from the past, when I was looking on your works, I noticed, for example, in the granite design in the style of one of the famous, I think it's a British brand. It's called Wedgwood.
Oh, Wedgwood,
Yeah, it's like a ceramic brand. And for example, I saw that you use the decorative elements like color and decorative elements. So, like you like inspired from their works, for example, in this way.
Yes, I mean that was kind of the second. I think, you know, Wedgwood to the English, especially Jasper, as it's called. They very much. This is kind of very much heritage brand here in England, and it was the second kind of porcelain I kind of not discovered, but I what's it called? I studied after the Delft pieces. I kind of started, you know, delving into the Jasperware, the Wedgwood, which again is kind of part of the learning process for me. So I mean, those, for example, were done with, I think I bought like 100 pieces of Jasperware, you know, on eBay, at auctions, everywhere like that. And then I got someone to photograph them. So I basically have this huge archive of photographs of Wedgwood, of pieces, and just putting them together and kind of making them into other objects digitally again from these photographs. It works very well, and it also comments on kind of English heritage and also kind of what people want, you know, because Jasperware, you know, I don't know when it kind of was. It's been popular until kind of probably 20, 30 years ago, when, you know, people didn't want it. They saw it as kind of something your grandmother had. And there's kind of been this reinvigoration of the Jasperware now, like recently in the last 5 years or 10 possibly, after it kind of was considered an old-fashioned thing because your grandmother would have them. And I think kind of the new generation kind of is kind of discovered, and that's with all porcelain in a way. They're kind of rediscovering it, which I find quite pleasant and pleasing. And part of that, of course, part of not my job, but part of what I like to do is also kind of present Jasperware to a client which is younger, who kind of would think in the past that it was something your grandmother had and they didn't want it. So you're creating this not coolness necessarily, but this want from the younger generation to want it again, by presenting it as an object which they're not used to seeing. Yeah.
No, it's really nice. That's it's like a little bit small education to the younger people from and some, like, of course the younger people will ask, what is it? So it's why, I don't know, why is this decorative elements, why this color, and maybe they start to search and they will find. So this
Exactly.
going from, yeah. And as well, that's I read that, for example, the new series which called Bridgertons, they inspired from as well from this brand Wedgwood.
What is, sorry,
The series of the British series called Bridgerton, they
okay.
as well inspired from this brand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like going from all the historical from the past.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, yeah, because every country has their own porcelain, famous porcelain production. Of course, Germany has many. The most famous, obviously, being Meissen, but you have other ones, Dresden porcelain, or lots of other ones. And then,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
like all parts. Yeah, like all parts, like all countries, and I don't know, the places, they have a own, like the brand or the designer or some like historical moments which are telling us a lot about this place.
Yeah, exactly.
But what do you think it's important to remember the history and the culture? Because if we compare different generations, for example, if we are talking about teenagers nowadays, they prefer to use, I don't know, virtual reality, TikTok, and contemporary art. They are not so into culture. That's why a lot of people can forget it. But why for you it's important to remember the culture and history for every country?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to explain this, but it's kind of one of those things where I do think that culture leads to enlightenment, in my point of view. And the problem is, I'm not saying that we're getting more, well, in a way, we're getting more and more stupid. And because we're kind of just looking at our screens and looking at, you kind of have to infiltrate people's screens while they're scrolling, and by doing that, you're kind of teaching someone about something they didn't necessarily know beforehand. And I'm not saying everyone is stupid, everyone is uncultured, because there's a lot of cultured people. But people don't really read a book anymore now. Before they go to bed, they sit on their iPad or on their phones and kind of go through Instagram or, their online shopping. And so kind of, if you combine the two with kind of pushing something in front of them, which kind of jugs, even if it jugs a memory, jigs a memory that they might have forgotten. People have seen paintings, they have blah blah, but they forget about them. And I think it's important to kind of show people, remind them that it's still out there, and there's stuff that is outside of your phone. And I think it's important that, I think the more culture you have, the more culture you kind of see, the more in order to be enlightened, I think you need to know your past in order to kind of avoid certain things, in order to not kind of go back into a fascist society, for example. You need to know what happened, in Italy or wherever, in the early parts of the 1900s. So I think it's one of those things where I think culture plays a part in teaching people why they shouldn't repeat history, basically.
And for you, personally, how do you decide which elements from the past to incorporate in your work, and the achieve this stem that the modern context will appear in your work?
That I don't know necessarily. It depends on what speaks to me, and there's a lot of. I mean, someone asked me the other day, what kind of art do you do? And I just said I do war. And it's not technically true because I don't do war, but there is kind of this thread in the art which kind of comments on war. And even if it's not so obvious, I've done a camouflage which is kind of, I've done it with several paintings intertwined and, things like that. So it doesn't become a camouflage anymore, but it kind of becomes a puzzle of kind of different paintings. But there is still that element of camouflage, which, it's nothing, camouflage in art is nothing new. Andy Warhol used it in a different way. But it's still kind of, there is kind of this unspoken thing that if you kind of mix two styles and two kind of genres, so you take the Renaissance and then you combine it with war, there's so many different possibilities to make new art from those two topics. And I think that's kind of what's quite interesting as well. Like whatever you do, even if you say, I'm going to do a camouflage and I'm going to use this painting, you can do so many things. You can and coming back to this a bit later, but like when people complain to me, other artists complain to me that someone's copying them, I'm like, you're an artist. You can always do new work. You can do better work. You can do, and that's kind of one of those things for me, like you have so much material to work from. If you take an Uzi, you can do so much with an Uzi. You can put him in Jesus' hands. You can put flowers in the Uzi. There's simpler ways. There's more intelligent ways. There's more thought out ways. But, you can do so many things. And I think that's kind of one of the things that's interesting, is that there's so many possibilities with using war and combining with other things. I don't always use war. I've done hearts, I've done skulls. Skull again is mortality, so it could possibly be somewhere combined with war. But it's like death and life in a way. So yeah.
But so you like to play with the death and life.
I think so, yeah. I think the thing is, people associate with, of course, people can associate with life and death. That's one of the main things that happens. One thing is certain is what, life, death, and taxes or something. Yeah. And so, yeah, people can associate with it in so many ways. And I think that's kind of interesting because you can develop new things constantly by doing that. I've commented on other things, pollution, blah, 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 consumerism. But, I'm not necessarily, I've had people write articles about my art and like completely twisted the narrative, which like it's nothing to do with what I meant with the piece. But yeah, anyways, yeah.
But why did you decide to work with this title? Yes, life and death, but what the main thing in that for you?
I think it's change. I mean, it's a lot to do. I mean, there's a lot of beauty in death, in my point of view. First of all, like the Victorians were obsessed with death, with the dark, arts and all that. The English Victorians were obsessed with that. Even the Italians, if you go to old tombs and things like that, there's skulls and everything, in Naples, there's this, I can't remember what it's called, but, you have these painted skulls and things like that. So kind of, it's nothing new, but it's the past that you kind of, again, reusing and kind of redeveloping for a current market. And why I like this is it's humanity, isn't it? It's humanity, it's culture, it's part of us. A skull will always have a certain effect on the person because we all have a skull technically, so it's like, but it's us when we're dead, so we kind of have an affinity to the skull as an object. And kind of making that into a piece that's also beautiful visually by, for example, putting, a still life, florals, whatever, inside of it. It kind of, one or two people have actually told me, when I saw your piece, I wasn't scared of dying anymore. And of course, that's kind of one of those like wow moments where oh Jesus Christ, you know, you kind of feel like, okay, I mean, I'm happy for them in a way. Um, that has that effect on them. But again, it's not necessarily what I meant with the piece, but it gave me a lot of not happiness, but like it was nice to hear that these people, I mean, one was about to die, so yeah, but it was nice that she said, one of these people said to me, I wake up every morning, I look at your piece, and I'm not scared of dying anymore, which is kind of, it's a nice feeling to have that people see things in your art which necessarily is not black on white what you meant with it, although you know that that can be obviously interpreted that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because like in your one of the main elements from your work, it's the grenade. So like you're like always like a lot using this element in your work. So like this aesthetic of war, like we can see that you're choosing more like war aesthetic, and you put in like in a modern element.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the thing is, it has in a way an anti-war message, because the porcelain, you can't kill anyone with a porcelain grenade, so it's kind of trying to make people stop and think what they are doing, the choices they're making, and which kind of position they're taking when there is a war, for example. You know, I mean, it is an element which kind of I enjoy using, because it's aesthetically, it's also quite pleasing, because it's something that, you know, it works because it's small. It's kind of, if you can hold a grenade, you know, like, and so it's kind of a piece you can touch, and making that in porcelain or whatever is it kind of shows a fragility, because if you drop it, of course it breaks, so you don't have, you know, it can't do any harm. And also, for example, when I was doing this project with Meissen, I was very scared because it was very delayed, this project. We started, I think, in 2019 talking to them. And it's, I mean, in 2023 is when they first came out with the first figurines. And I was so scared that because of the Ukraine war, that they were going to come back to me like, no, we can't do this anymore. And what they did instead was like, Magnus, this is now so relevant, it's so perfect, we have to do this, because they were all kind of anti-war messages. So, you know, there's one figurine that's cutting the barbed wire, which has to do with, you know, no borders, no refugee, like not no refugees, but opening borders to the refugees and things like that, which is not necessarily what people get from it, but that's what it's meant to be. And also, you know, there's a figurine throwing a bomb, hand grenade rather, and you know, on the hand grenade it says love. So they're not throwing a grenade of death and destruction. They're throwing love. So you're literally trying to kind of comment on choosing love rather than hate and destruction. And then the third one again is one of them breaking a rocket. And I did ask for them not to make the face so sad, because he's broken the rocket and he looks sad. And I was like, no, he's supposed to be happy because he's broken the rocket. So just he stopped the destruction of this rocket. Anyway, so yeah, so I kind of like, there is a message behind my pieces, but they're not always so obvious, and they're not necessarily what I want. You know, people can make up their own what's it called, opinions. I mean, I know one of my grenades is being I think it's a malachite and silver one. It's going to a general in the Libyan army. So, you know, so he's like, someone has gifted that to him. So, you know, it's one of those things where like, there are different views on different pieces, and it's it's not for me to kind of dictate necessarily what people should think about them, but there is a thought behind them, but it's not necessarily for me to tell the people what they should think about the pieces, because I think that's part of our problem. Is now also this group mentality that we all like one thing because everyone likes this thing. And I think people should make up their own minds about their own opinions based on the information they have learned. And part of that is, of course, learning things culturally. And yeah, so you can kind of think with your own mind instead of kind of thinking what everyone else thinks.
And you don't like to explain your works?
I do explain the works. I just don't think that it's for me to impose what I meant with it on people. Because I mean, I can tell you, I have a piece of art by Ryan Callahan. He goes by the name of Rika. And it's not one of his normal pieces, but it's an oil drum. It's a print of an oil drum, which has been flattened. And it's got an American flag on it. And basically, when he did this, what he meant to say was kind of the greed, the consumerism of the oil in the American state, basically. But to me, it means something completely different because, first of all, I'm Norwegian. We have all the oil, we're rich because of the oil. And also, I went to American schools my entire childhood. So this piece, which is something that's against greed and consumerism in the US, to me means something completely different because it means Norway and part of my childhood for me. And I told them this as well, and they thought it was quite interesting because I think people, it should mean what they want it to mean to them.
So yeah, you like prefer that the people have own feelings, own thoughts in the moment when they see your work. So not like you're pushing them to this is this meaning or that's what I wanted to say. So no, you can fly and decide what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I think it's really interesting that it's kind of liberty for like each person choose own meaning.
Yes, exactly. I mean, an 8-year-old will have a different understanding of a piece that a 20 or 18-year-old will have. And, for example, I don't know if you've seen The Boy and His Pills. It's a boy from, I think he's from the 1700s or something like that. And it's black and white. And then he has some pills. He's holding some pills. And, a lot of people who used to go clubbing and raving and things like that love this piece. And, that's fine by me. But if you read the number on the pills, the first one I did was, I think the number on the pill has to do with, it's a pill that is given for mild schizophrenia and personality disorder. So basically, this piece has nothing to do with clubbing and raving and dancing. It has to do with mental health. And I understand people don't necessarily see that in it. And that's kind of what I like as well, because, you have this generation of people in Norway, in England, that kind of in the 90s, they went to illegal raves and things like that. So that's kind of, they kind of like to remember that part of their life. And that's kind of the person who's kind of also enjoys this piece because it kind of mixes their current kind of cultural, not enlightenment, but state now where they're a bit older, they know a bit more. And then it also combines it with their clubbing days when they were kind of in their, 18 or 16 to 20s or 25 or 30s, I guess. But yeah. And, I also, after the Delft porcelain pieces I did in the beginning, I did a lot of religious things. And, I come back to them sometimes, and this is more kind of to comment on religion and how it's again, it's kind of an organized. I'm not against religion as anything, but I also do believe that it also is a way of controlling the population, which there's nothing wrong with that. But again, these pieces are commenting on what would happen if we didn't have Christianity, if we didn't have Adam and Eve, or the first what's it called, the Jesus Christ. Anyways, if part of I didn't Adam and Eve, and it says break glass for new beginning, the pieces are called, and it's kind of giving the viewer a choice. What if you could choose? Would you again break the glass and have Adam and Eve kind of do whatever they did? Of course, whether it's true or not, that's a different thing. But would you have religion develop as it has, given us all this culture, paintings, blah blah blah, as we have had, or would you just leave them in the glass cases and see what would happen if we didn't have Christianity when it happened, and things like that? So it's kind of a comment on organized religion, and kind of, again, think for yourself. Don't be dictated by what a religion says necessarily, because of course it's kind of hypocritical, this, because people choose what part of the religion they should follow and what part they shouldn't, a lot of the time. What's a sin, what's not a sin? If you read the Bible, then a lot of things we do daily is a sin. But yeah, anyways, people often ask if I'm religious, and I'm like, not really. I believe in a higher power, but it's not necessarily a Christian higher power, or any other higher power for that sake. But yeah, anyways.
I got the impression as well that you travel quite a lot, and maybe during your travel, do you often visit museums or the different galleries? And maybe do you have your favorite one?
I do. I mean, when I travel, like, I'm very lucky because I have, especially in Italy as well. When you can go to any freaking village and there's a church and there's a Titian or like, Rembrandt, and this is a church which is what, it has 1,000 visitors a year. No one goes in there, especially tourists. So kind of in Italy, you have this kind of wealth of art that's not always visible to everyone, but it's still there. And if you look for it, you find it in a way. And I think I do go to museums whenever I'm in different places. And I also go to I go to them many times. I tend to go to several museums several times as well. And you kind of always kind of discover new things. Of course, if it's a contemporary exhibition, it changes all the time usually, but and that's quite nice. But also these other older museums which have a permanent collection, it's nice to go and see them again and again and again, because you don't always, you can't spend 4 hours in one museum and get everything with you, or see everything. So you kind of choose what you want to see, and then you go back like a year later even, and then you see other things. But yeah, favorite museums though, I do have some.
Which ones?
It's so funny because when I'm asked, I never remember the names of these places. I mean, it's one of my favorites. It's not my most favorite one, but if we're gonna say around Florence, I think the Stibert Museum is one of my favorites, and I always take guests when they arrive, or they come visit me in Florence. I always take them there because first of all, there's hardly anyone there ever. It's just a bit up the hill from Florence. And, you know, when you go, people who go to Florence, they kind of do the three main things. You know, the Uffizi, they see the Michelangelo, the David, and then they go maybe to the Duomo. And, you know, because, you know, they're only there for 3 days usually. And so you have to see, or 4 days, so you have to see these 4 things, 3 or 4 things. So I think that's one of my favorites, because it also has a collection of Japanese art, Japanese, what's it called, samurai outfits, or what's it called, whatever. Anyways, and as well as it has Middle Eastern art. It has, you know, it even has a very, very good copy of the Mona Lisa, which is probably considered one of the better copies of the Mona Lisa. And you know, they have, you know, they even have a Botticelli there, which is literally hanging very unassuming in a corner. So it's very nice to go to this museum, because you know, they even have Meissen figurines, for God's sake. It's so it has a lot of cultural wealth there, and it's one of my favorite because of that, because it's so mixed. It's a collection of an eccentric person. I do adore the Wallace Collection in London.
Mm-hmm.
Also, one of those museums which, if you're in London for a long weekend, you might not go there, you know, but it's such a gem. And I think over the past 10 years, maybe, I think more and more people have discovered it. And so kind of, yeah.
So do you think that with the time, like now in a modern world, the people discovering more something like something like new, maybe not new, but different, not going to the main points which all the tourists are going. So now the people are changed the choice, so they prefer to go something different.
Maybe. I mean, I think, you know, you can only go to, you know, the Uffizi. I mean, I guess you can go several times, but like, once you've seen it several times, you kind of try to find something new. You kind of have a different kind of taste for, you know, seeing something else. The Bargello Museum as well in Florence is one of my favorites, which is more central, obviously. Oh no, listen to this. One of my favorite museums is Casa Buonarroti, which is his house. And it was owned by an art dealer after Buonarroti, so maybe many years after. And he kind of restored it a bit and kind of literally found one of Buonarroti's sculptures inside one of the wood panelings there. But it's quite interesting because it's a very lovely house with quite a good, an interesting collection. And again, you know, it's a smaller museum, but again, it's such a lovely thing to think that Buonarroti, that was his studio, that's where he lived, because that's parts of the museum is still original to how it used to be when Buonarroti lived there. And so there was one more. There was Casa Buonarroti, the Wallace Collection, Stibert, and what was the fourth or fifth one? Anyways, I guess that's enough now for favorite museum. There is another one where I usually go to, and it's so where there's never anyone there, and you're like, this is so. But that's also part of the amazement that you can go to these museums, which, you know, have the most amazing, famous art, and there's no one freaking there.
Yeah.
And it's so nice, even for, you know, for Instagram, that you don't actually have to, you know, you don't have to wait in the queue. You just take some pictures because there's no one there. It's like untouched nearly. But yeah, I mean, I think this comes to obviously this thing about over tourism, which kind of, you know, I kind of agree with that. But it depends on what kind of tourism it is. So anyways.
And you mentioned several times like Asian culture. Do you like it a lot?
You know, the more you delve deep into art, you know, obviously Asian culture has obviously also influenced the Western culture more than vice versa, actually. But anyways, it's nice to see when you suddenly see hints of Asian culture in, for example, a Impressionism, for example. You know, you see, I think it was Gauguin, whoever, that kind of was inspired by this Japanese woodblock printer, and you can see it and you can tell it, and I think it's quite amazing. And I think once, you know, you've read a lot about different types or delve deeper into it, you know, engraving, Renaissance, Baroque, Flemish, whatever art, you kind of want to learn new things. And part of that obviously is Asian art. You know, a lot of the gold leaf I use is based not only on, you know, gold leaf from Venice, but also Asian, you know, Chinese screens, Japanese screens with gold leaf from back in the day. And so kind of, it's kind of interesting because you're combining the two. And it's also kind of, I've always kind of had one eye on the Asian kind of culture and art, because it's interesting to mix it into everything else, which has been in the past as well, as we know. And, you know, the thing is, when you know a lot about different things, you cannot avoid not knowing something about Asian art and kind of also wanting to discover more about Asian art. Because it's interesting and it's kind of, it's a different way of thinking than we would necessarily think. And learning, of course, is a very, it's a beautiful thing in my point of view, learning new things and learning new cultures and kind of realizing why they did a certain thing and how their society worked and the harmony there and the harmony here and things like that.
And you inspired from the Asian work in your art. So you're doing something like relative with Asian works.
It has been said that it's quite controversial, my new piece. So let's see what I do with it. But it's supposed to be a woodblock print anyways. If we do it as completely woodblock print, I'm not sure yet. But again, you know, this is a process that I've been researching a lot about. You know, the wood carvers and things like that. And it's a very, very detailed process, you know, from where the paper has to be wet when you're doing it. And, you know, you have to do, it's a new process. And I think that's nice to know how it works. And then taking that and kind of, how do you do this for the contemporary market? Do you do it as a complete woodblock print? Do you do it part woodblock, part using a more modern media? Do you, for example, instead of getting someone to carve the woodblock, do you use laser engraving on a woodblock? You know, that's the modern way of doing, you know. So it's kind of choices you have to make. And again, you can say, oh, but you should do it how it was done before because that's culturally correct. You could, but you also have to think about the person who is buying this piece of art. There is a certain level of what they will accept as genuine. So if you do it, for example, you do a woodblock print where, let's just say, there's 5 or 4 or 3 of the colors that are done with a woodblock, maybe the 2 or 3 are done with screen print, or maybe it's digital and then it's printed with woodblock on top. You know, I don't think the collector, it matters to them so much that it needs to be historically completely correct. Although, you know, I'd love to, but, you know, I'd love to do it like that. But then, you know, it's a different time. It's a different whatever, you know, you can't pay, you know, whatever get someone to do a wood block for you, because it's going to cost you many thousands per block. And so suddenly, instead of having a print that's, you know, available to a bigger audience, you have a print that's, you know, relatively expensive. And again, you're not then showing to a wider range of person this style of printing, which they will obviously get to know better through your artwork as well. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah.
So when you do your artworks, you always think about customers and collectors too,
because you should sell it.
Not always, but you know, I come from a fashion background. You know, you don't make art. Fashion isn't art. Some pieces can be considered art, but fashion itself, in my point of view, is not art. It's design, and with design, you are making something that should sell. Although a lot of designers don't think you should. You're making it, you know, for the beauty of it. But anyways, yes. So because of that, you know, I always, even early on, I kind of had the market in mind. You know, I get opinions from people, you know, I don't necessarily heed their opinion. If I don't agree with it, I do it anyways. Sometimes, you know, the easiest way to do this is doing like that, but I don't want to do it like that. And you make choices. And sometimes you do things that you know will sell. Sometimes you do, well, I prefer it like this. People might not. People, you know, so, you know, I you know, for example, going back to this Chanel grenade I once did, it's also kind of a interesting, what's it called, example, or like a research project, because, you know, the person who buy that Chanel grenade won't necessarily buy, you know, a porcelain grenade by me. So kind of, it's a different market, and it's also made for a different target market. And you know that when you're putting a Chanel on it, you know, the Chanel logo. And I think it's also interesting that when you do that, there is a certain clientele who will want that and who wouldn't have wanted it if it was just a porcelain one. So yeah, but anyways, as answering your question, yes, I do think about the market, the collector, not to an extent where I read your artwork because of that, but you know, yeah.
Yeah, but still, it's important. So it's, in some ways, you need to think about the market.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go too much into thinking about the market, but like, it is, of course, important, especially as an up-and-coming artist. It's important that you don't make art that only you like. You have to do it with having in mind that other people should like it as well. Which is it's not necessarily the right way. I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but I think it's the easier way to do it if you want to have a successful career. You might even further down the line kind of go back to your roots if that's what you want to do, and do something that's only you like, when you might have established your name So basically, people will buy it because it's by you rather than that they like it. You know, I mean, again, that's another dilemma. But yeah.
What does a concept of rediscovery mean to you personally? Does it like manifest in the way you approach both like your life, your art?
I think, I mean, rediscovery for me is very important. It's like one of the main things that I enjoy doing, because I think you can, you can rediscover a lot of things. You can discover a lot of things in this world. But it's not, it's not, as I said, it's not the same subject every time. It might be the Asian art, it might be the Renaissance art, it might be a church, it might be a building, whatever. Sir John Soane is the 5th best museum. Sir John Soane's museum. Anyways, I think it's important because it brings me to places which I would never necessarily have gone to, and it keeps me being taught things and enjoying things, rediscovering things, and learning things, and enjoying things that past centuries have also enjoyed. And I think that's quite important in life, at least to me. That's what's important to me, not to everyone. Some people, it's important to go clubbing. I mean, I had those days back in the day as well where I loved going clubbing, but it's nice, and also to learn new things and delve into things that you didn't necessarily know, and because everything can be discovered, everything can be kind of you can look into the background of even a porcelain plate. Oh, how did it end up there? What was it for? Who was it by? What does it depict? All these things. And then suddenly you've gone to see this one porcelain plate, and then you're suddenly in a Maiolica factory from the 1700s in Italy. Like that's where the trip takes you, or that research takes you, and then you kind of, oh, this was given as a marriage present. That's why it has to, So it's kind of interesting because you're seeing a different part of our time or our history depicted on these objects. Which, if you just see them plainly, it doesn't necessarily show exactly what it was for. But with researching further the background of it, or reading about it, you kind of discover new things, and not necessarily about that plate. Everything, from that plate to everything, the factory where that plate was made, the place it was made, the artist, who it was given to, who was married to who, for example, and why, the whatever. Do you know why it's called marmalade, by the way? Do you know where the word marmalade comes from?
Yeah, marmalade. The word marmalade?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Can you tell me, please?
This is quite a funny one, which is basically Maria de' Medici, so the Italian Florentine family. She was married to the king of France, and she was obviously Italian. And basically, the priests took orange marmalade or jam to her because Maria was ill. And C vitamins, whatever, oranges, blah blah blah. So it was kind of a remedy for her ill health. So basically, marmalade comes from Maria Malada. So Maria is ill, so marmalade comes from Maria Malada. Now you know.
Yeah.
But again, this is one of those things that you don't know unless you kind of find, if you go down this little research thing, and then suddenly like, oh my God, that's why that is. So, and it's interesting, and it's sometimes something so simple that kind of, yeah.
You have the chance to visit the past and spend like one day in the period which period you would like to choose? Which time of the period you would like to choose to spend one day in the past?
I would probably do Renaissance, Venice.
And
I
why?
think
Yeah, why?
So, I mean, I think Venice in the past was such a cultural hub and such an amazing, trade and port city that you had all these influences from, the Ottomans or whatever, and Africa, even from Asia, and you literally had this mixture of culture, which you can see in the paintings there, which you didn't necessarily have a lot of other places, because everyone used Venice as this trade port city. And I think, it's not like Venice today where you can't walk through the streets because there's too many tourists. But you can see all these in the paintings. You can see all these people in their dresses and gowns and things like that, and all kind of differently dressed, because they're from different parts of the world. And of course, this influenced each other again. Where you had people from Africa who kind of came, and then suddenly, with fabric and all that. I mean, maybe not necessarily specifically from Africa, but you had silks from Asia and things like that. So it was kind of a cultural melting pot, and I mean, even a bit before the Renaissance, obviously. But I think that's kind of a place I would want to visit, to see, because I think it would be very enjoyable to see all the mixing of cultures.
Yeah, and with whom would you like to talk from that period of life?
I mean, maybe Buonarroti, possibly. Yeah, maybe.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, because I don't think necessarily was a specific. I mean, maybe. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, that's great.
And we have our final question, I think. And what do you believe is the power of art for you?
What I believe with the power of art.
Yeah.
What I think it can do. I mean, the power of art for me. There is a power to art. I mean, it has always been used as propaganda, anyways. And that's what's fascinating with, for example, Palazzo Pitti and other places, Palazzo Barberini, for example, in Rome, and Palazzo Pitti in Florence, is that these ceiling paintings were used for propaganda even back then. You have the matriarch of the family painted as Virgin Mary to kind of elevate her to status of kind of religious icon, basically. And so I think the power of art has always been a thing, and it's obviously been used for propaganda a lot of the time as well. But I think I also kind of use it to kind of share stories with people, share beauty, share kind of things that people haven't seen before, that haven't been discovered. They haven't been to that specific museum, on the top of a hill in the church in the middle of Tuscany, for example. They haven't been there. They might never find that place. So I think the power of art is to kind of teach people and show people that there are other artworks outside of museums as well, but also in the basements of museums, which are never seen. That kind of, sometimes you get these exhibitions which kind of you will only see like once every 100 years, because all the pieces would never be together, because they're all from different museums, for example, of the same artist or the same kind of subject. So I think there's a power of art to kind of bring people together as well, but also divide in a way. So, but yeah, I think the power of art is, again, it's not a need, but I think it's a good thing to have. So I guess you do need it somehow as well. Because if without art, you wouldn't be able to kind of comment on things without kind of having to write them black and white. You can kind of show a bit more nuance with art. You can show a bit more a thought behind it rather than telling people like fuck the police, for example. You know, you don't have to write that necessarily. So yeah.
And you like for you the art, it's one of the mainest, or maybe not, or for you it's like really important in your life. Like for
Yes,
yeah.
I think it is. Yeah, it is. What's it called? Art and design is important. Yeah, I think it's important because it can teach you something. Apart from a lot of it, most of it, or a lot of it, depending on what you look at, what you like. I mean, a lot of it is beautiful as well, and it kind of gives you a sense of happiness and worth, maybe even when you see, when you have art, when you see art, when you collect art, and also when you make art. You know, and it makes you happy if other people are happy with the art. So yeah.